Well, welcome. Tonight, a lot to talk about. I don't know how we're going to get it in 58 minutes, but the Supreme Court decisions alone could fill a show, not counting the effect of gas, inflation, crime that luckily we haven't seen it explode here in Milford, but there's parts of the country that are really having issues. But let's start with introductions. Lauren.
Hi, I'm Lauren Wilton. I'm the chair of the Milford Democratic Town Committee. Been here a couple times with you guys. Enjoy it, and I'm back.
Glenn.
I'm Glenn Wake. I am the treasurer of the Milford Democratic Town Committee. Been around for probably about a year now, right? Something like that.
And Christine.
Christine Crane, a member of the Milford Democratic Town Committee and State Committee, as well as host of Drinking Liberally, promoting democracy, what's left of it, one pint at a time.
Are the liberals drinking again?
Oh, yes.
When did we stop?
Well, I didn't see any notices for a while, and then I thought I just saw one.
Well, we kind of are regrouping now that things have loosened up a little bit and trying to meet in person. We didn't really do much virtually. It was difficult. We tried it a couple times, but it just didn't have the same flavor as an in-person meeting. So.
Okay, so where do we start? Supreme Court decisions?
What Supreme Court decision? There's so many.
That's why I say decisions.
Might as well jump into the fire and talk about the Dobbs decision, which overturns Roe v. Wade.
That's
okay.
The elephant.
Lauren, you've expressed a mild interest in that over the show.
Don't say I didn't warn you guys. God, I remember going back to 2016 and warning everybody that this is exactly what was going to happen. And people were telling me I was hysterical. And I think I said it on this exact show. This has been a long-term plan of the far right, and they've succeeded. And they didn't do it in a very fair way, because truly Merrick Garland should be sitting on the Supreme Court right now. And he's not. And I mean, even if he was, we probably still would have lost in this decision, but at least we might have maybe had more negotiation between the judges. I don't know. But anyway, the Dobbs decision overruled Roe and overruled Casey, which Casey, by the way, was a conservative court. That was the Rehnquist court, which upheld Roe. So you've got 50 years of precedent that the present politicized Supreme Court just threw out the window based on religious grounds, basically, because there's no legal basis for them to have done that.
But now, explain what actually happened, because you're hearing it depends on what station you turn on, CNN or Fox News. But you're hearing that the Supreme Court...
Fox News is a propaganda channel. Any cable news show arguably is a propaganda channel, but Fox, I mean, if
another level.
They're not reporting news. I cannot put them on the same level. I mean, let's just, who cares what they say? You might as well say, well, what did Lauren say? I mean, it means nothing. It's a bunch of, okay, I'll try to calm down. I'm not in the mood.
It's worse than that. I mean,
stories.
I can guarantee you that the guys at CNN or MSNBC aren't emailing Biden's chief of staff to tell them how to spin certain things or how to give them steps on how to present to the media or things like that. Things that Sean Hannity and Laura Ingraham were caught doing, directly texting the chief of staff of Trump.
During an attempted coup.
Yes, and it shows how tight Fox News is as an organ of the Republican Party, not just as a news organization or spinning the news of the day, but literally a campaign and media arm of the Republican Party.
But don't I hear the same thing from the other side?
What are you hearing?
It's not the same.
Tell us the two things that you're hearing.
Okay, CNN only reports things against conservatives. The Hunter Biden laptop won't be reported. And you go well, to some people it is. It was an issue when I saw Trump's kids running around the White House and making a living off their father and the federal government, in my mind, that was an issue. But there's no less of an issue when I hear Hunter Biden getting $80,000 a month to be on a gas board that he knows nothing about.
Well, let's talk about the clear distinction there. Ivanka and Jared were in the White House having direct impact on our lives. Whatever Hunter Biden benefited from his familial relationships overseas has no bearing on our lives. Truly, it did not come out of our pockets, but we are literally right now paying for Trump's entire crooked family to protect them, security-wise. And they have made billions as a result of being in the White House and the relationships they made with China, Saudi Arabia, etc. I mean, there's just no comparison. There's no comparison. So.
Hunter Biden was a private citizen. And if you want to complain about nepotism, you might want to talk to Meghan McCain or Sarah Huckabee Sanders or any of the other numerous children of Republicans who have gotten media jobs or other jobs like that. You know, they're all, you know, it's purely from nepotism. It has nothing to do with their skill or ability to communicate. It's entirely about nepotism.
But isn't that the same both ways?
No.
So Hunter Biden got 80,000 or whatever a month to be on a board because of his vast knowledge.
Nobody disagrees that Hunter who cares?
It's absolutely nepotism. But the thing is that he was a private citizen, not working as an agent of the government when he did that.
And how is that illegal?
And you know, I'm not saying it's illegal. I just didn't like either side. I did not like.
Then why are we bringing it up? Why are we talking about that?
Exactly.
Let's let it go.
It's all these false equivalencies that make us insane. Okay, because
we're anti-nepotism, but it's really apples and oranges when you compare him to the Trump kids. It's just very different.
Well, let's start with the ruling on Roe. What does it really mean?
Well, long term, I mean, there is no longer a constitutionally protected right for women to have control of their bodies if they happen to get pregnant. That's bottom line, because they're kicking it down to the states. And some people have the attitude like, well, what's the big deal? They're just going to let the states handle it. And then, you know, states can govern themselves. Well, look back to the civil rights era. If we left it up to the states, there's places like Mississippi, for example, Alabama, it'd still be segregated. So there's certain things that are just fundamental. And what Roe granted and all of the precedent that followed it is what's called substantive due process. In other words, it's recognizing that there's certain rights that are just fundamental to being a human in this country. And it doesn't have to be spelled out in the Constitution. That, you know, the Constitution doesn't say you have the right to an abortion. It doesn't say that, nor should it. But there is an understanding that, you know, life, liberty, property, due process. It's bigger than just the paper of the Constitution. And so what Roe did is it just basically freed women and allowed them to enter the workplace and allowed them to have to leave unhappy relationships or possibly not die if they had an ectopic pregnancy. I mean, there's just the fallout from this is devastating. I cannot express enough how devastating it is, because it isn't just a matter of, oh, well, you just can't have an abortion. And the sad part is people will still have abortions. It's still going to happen. Nobody has stopped abortions. What it stopped is preventing people, not just women, because trans people can.
But are you talking about safe abortions?
Safe abortions.
Well, yeah. And think about it this way too. It isn't just abortion. What about miscarriages? What about if you have a miscarriage and you go septic, or you have an ectopic pregnant, I'm not saying it right, but you know what I mean. And in other words, where the pregnancy can't possibly survive, and you could die if you don't have an abortion. How is this pro-life?
Or if you have cancer, and they won't give you cancer treatment until you abort your child because it's going to die. because of the cancer treatment. And there are several cases that have happened in the past, recent past, where young women, 18, 19, 20, had been diagnosed with cancer, and their family was more religious, and they asked her not to abort, and she didn't, live to the end of the pregnancy because the cancer killed her.
So 2 people die.
And it happens, an unfortunate amount of times, and it's going to happen a whole lot more now.
Now, Lauren, when the laws are so different, because I'm hearing places like Missouri, I mean, basically, before you even know you're pregnant, you're barred from abortion. And when I hear 6 weeks, is that really practical?
Of course not. No, of course not.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I didn't know I was pregnant until I was almost 8 weeks pregnant many years ago. And I chose the option that is no longer available anymore. And that was many years ago. And you don't know. You don't know that you're pregnant until sometimes, 6 weeks is way too early. And they also give a wiggle room too. When they give you your due date, a lot of times it's an educated guess. And, it's a 2-week window of time that they don't know when you're due. So, that time frame is way too unrealistic.
This is forced birth. This is a forced birth law. You are basically imprisoning women, mostly women, for 9 months and then a lifetime. Unless you use the Amy Coney Barrett analysis of, there's so many that are willing to take that baby. Okay. Tell that to the 12-year-old who could die just giving birth. Okay. It's insane.
The emotional trauma that they're allowing these women to be put through is unconscionable. They're forgetting about that. They're talking about the life of the baby. What about the emotional stress and the trauma that these women have to go through, that are being forced to do something that maybe they chose not to? And then the guilt and the shame and the residual effects of that throughout the rest of their lives. And that's not right either, because they're worried about an unborn baby, and they could give 2 cares about the women who have to go through this.
And there's abortions that happen for so many different reasons. So this is the thing that's so wrong. This always should have been between women and their doctors, because this is a medical procedure and it's no different than any other medical procedure. Full stop. That's it. And why old men that couldn't find a clitoris if you smacked them upside the head are in charge of this makes no sense to me at all. And I mean, really, this is frightening. And it's all about control, and it is going to do extreme damage, because it starts with abortion, and then you just watch all the rights go away.
Well, before we go down that slope, when you're saying why do old men, I don't care if it's an old man or an old woman. It's probably the most tense moment of my life when they told me that they had to do an amnio because of the age of my wife. And I remember, I'll admit it, saying a prayer, saying, God, don't make me make this decision. Please don't make me make this decision. But the thing was, it was a decision that Sharon and I would make.
Exactly.
I'm not pro-abortion, but I'm certainly not trying to tell somebody that I have the right to decide what they should do.
Well, and that's a good point, Al, because most Americans believe that abortion should be a right, that the right to choose should, it's over 60% of the people in America think that that's true. This is such a private thing. And when you remove this option in certain states, you're not just removing the right to have an abortion, you're also removing the right to other kinds of reproductive health care. Whether it's a D&C for uterine polyps, or a D&C to remove a pregnancy that miscarried, or whatever the reason. And then also, a lot of those facilities also provide reproductive, contraception and things like that. And so now that if those places shut down, where are people going to be able to get the contraception from? This is really a short-sighted. I mean, the dog caught the car, and now what?
But they were trying to defund Planned Parenthood, and they spun it, so made it sound like that's all Planned Parenthood did was abortions, when in reality that was such a small percentage of the services they provided to women, and women who don't have insurance either. Because if they really cared and wanted to do something, it would be universal health care or be available, and so they just cherry pick the things and kind of chip away at the rights. And then the other piece that's being driven is this Christian theory approach, the theocracy that they're trying to drive us to. And that's what I'm also concerned about as well. Not to jump ahead, but the Supreme Court ruling on the man being able to kneel on the 50-yard line and pray, and anybody else who wants to join them. The point is, it's very demonstrative. He's out there showing that it's not done in private or kind of a quiet prayer. And so where are we heading with that? And that's kind of helping drive the abortion train too, or the anti-abortion train, is the Christian argument on this, which we're not a Christian state, but that's what they're trying to move us toward. And what happens if I wanted to worship the flying spaghetti monster and go out on the 50-yard line and put my colander on my head and worship ramen noodles or something? I'm sure that they would clutch their pearls and be in shock because it doesn't look like what they want. So, we're trying to be.
You'd have the right. I mean, if you think about what happened a number of years ago, we had the white supremacists come through Milford. And a few of us were just praying that nobody would take the bait. I went to my mailbox, and there was the fecal matter, their crusader or whatever that they put in there. And I just kept praying that nobody, it's like a stray cat. Don't feed them. They'll move on. And it was only when one person in Milford kind of took the bait that all of a sudden they stayed.
What do you mean take the bait?
Yeah, when was that?
Oh, a couple of years ago when they started arguing. What I mean by took the bait, well, Lauren, is if they come in and I hate the fact that I have no commonality with these people. I value nothing that they bring, but they have the right to express themselves if they do it peacefully. And the minute you start arguing with them, you give them oxygen. That's what I mean by take the bait. They come into Milford, they bang their drums, they make noise, they drop those stupid flyers of theirs, and they leave.
See, I disagree with that. In fact, there was a group, who was it, the Super Happy whatever, that was in Boston, and white supremacists and all that stuff, and a bunch of people, counter-protesters, drove them out, and they had to have police protection. I mean, I know you're talking about the Skokie case, and the whole notion of people quietly parading down the street with their Nazi signs or whatever. What, those days are over. Hate is no longer going to be tolerated. I'm done. If I see somebody like that putting something like that in my mailbox, I'll be videoing it, and then I'll be turning it into the DA so they can be federally prosecuted for going into my mailbox, because that's a federal crime.
Where does it stop? What scares me is the minute you start deciding what is acceptable. Now, anything that causes violence, straight up, I agree with you. But if somebody wants to march down the street and say Buddhists who worship on Tuesdays are not good people, I don't agree with them. I don't know any Buddhists that worship on Tuesdays, but that's that pesky First Amendment, isn't it?
Oh yeah, they have the right to do that, but that I also have the right to chase them out, verbally chase them out.
Well, verbally, yes, but not physically.
No. But I mean, make them uncomfortable. I'm not tolerating this anymore. I don't care if it's on Facebook. I don't care where it is. If I see the hate, I'm calling it out. And that's what's called being an ally. Because if we just sit there and tolerate this, this is how this gets bigger. I'm just not putting up with it. I'm not.
If we could talk real briefly about the intersection between white supremacy and this Dobbs decision, I'd appreciate it.
Go ahead.
So I believe it was Alito, but I don't remember exactly, called out as part of his decision on Dobbs that prior to the Roe decision, as many as 20% of babies who were white were put up for adoption. It seems like a weird thing to put in a decision like this. But at a Trump rally a couple of weeks ago, a state senator in Illinois got up in front of Trump and said this Dobbs decision was a victory for white life.
Yes.
Now she said that, you know, it was she misspoke and whatever, but let's be real about this. This is really to increase white birth rates in many states. And I'll tell you one other thing. Florida has privatized their child care system. The system that would take care of orphans and kids who are maintained by the state. And so they have a financial incentive to create more kids who would go into the system. One of the big donors for Ron DeSantis runs this system. And it has been an unmitigated disaster there, and I believe in Oklahoma, where they've also done that. The amount of child abuse is outrageous, and there's no check on the system. So that's
Glenn,
another
help me
aspect.
understand.
Sure.
If you want to increase the white population, is it accurate then to say that more white mothers have abortions than minority mothers, brown mothers, black mothers, yellow mothers?
I think as a percentage possibly, and I according to the statistics, as many as 20% of white children were put up for adoption prior to Roe. So if you live and die with that statistic, and it's down to 3% now, then obviously there is a major gap there. 17% of kids who might have been adopted instead.
They used to send the girls away before Roe v. Wade, and there was that population boom. And most of the women that were sent away because they went to an aunt's or whatever to have the baby, to put them up for adoption, were white. Because people of color, they embraced the fact that maybe the woman was in a position where, you know, she got pregnant, and the families tended to be a little more supportive. So the shame associated with women that were white to have a child out of wedlock was too great for a lot of the families. There was a book out, and the name of the author escapes me. She was a professor at RISD, went around the country interviewing women from the time of the end of World War II to just as Roe v. Wade, these women that had put the babies up for adoption because the family pressure and whatnot, and how they never stopped thinking about that. And many of them wanted to find and reunite with the babies. And when I was an adoption worker for the state, I did a stint with reunifying people who had put babies up for adoption and, you know, wanted to find their child or wanted some closure with that. They don't forget. I mean, it's an emotionally trying decision to make. And most of those women were pressured into like leaving and giving the baby up for adoption. They had no other recourse. They had no support, and the family was asking them to do that. I mean, mining the records, the old records, before you contacted families was amazing to see. You didn't hear the woman's voice at all in the transcripts at all. It was just the family pressuring them. So I think Glenn is on the right course when he says that most of them are white or were white that would put the babies up for adoption. And they had not many options. I mean, unless they wanted to seek out an abortion, which was expensive and not readily available to people unless you had a lot of means. So it was called The Girls That Went Away, and it was a vignette of different stories of all these women about, you know, their experience of finding out they're pregnant, putting the baby up for adoption, and you know, trying to keep it a secret. A lot of shame for the family, and a lot of emotions that go on with that. It's not an easy decision. And, you know, people think that women just want to just have an abortion, you know, just to get rid of it. That's, in most instances, that's not the case. It's an emotionally trying decision, and it never leaves you.
Well, then what actually happened? You know, they said it's not in the Constitution. They're kicking it down to the states. So
Well,
now we're going to
drinking
have.
wasn't in the Constitution, and they outlawed that for a while. I mean, you want to get into the weeds, for God's sake. If the Constitution named everything that was your right, you know how big it would be? It would go on ad nauseum.
Well, that gets down to, I mean, there's two ways of looking at the Constitution. You can look at it the way I look at it, which it's a living document that evolves over time, and that's how it would survive for hundreds of years. Or you look at it like the originalists look at it, and that means if it's not in the Constitution, then you ain't got it. But that fails on its face. Anybody who's a person of color would be like, hello, I'm not even a person then. And also, by the way, women, we weren't either.
I was going to say, women, sheep, dogs, they were all treated almost the same back then.
So yeah. So
we were property.
You got to leave room to grow, because anybody today who would think that a woman is not as qualified as a man to do certain positions would be looked at as if they're crazy. But yet 200, 300 years ago, that was common.
I mean, the founding fathers, you know, we put them. You know, that guy who was at the January 6th hearing, the Speaker of the House in Arizona, Rusty. I can't think of his last name. He was the one who got pressured to try to put in a different slate of electors and by Trump and everything. And it struck me that he said that in his opinion, the Constitution was like ordained, like, in other words, like God influenced the founders.
Well, they're treating it like the Quran, that it was written by the hand of God and should never be altered by any words.
Yeah, and the way he was saying it, I mean, I agreed with the end result of what he was saying, which is that, you know, he took his oath as seriously as if he held the hand of God, and he was not going to violate his oath. I get that, but when he ever started talking like that, I'm like, dude, you're really that's religious zealot right there. That's not.
But you know, Lauren, some of the things I'll never understand. I have a wife who I know is smarter than me, more capable than me. She married down. I have 2 daughters. When I think of some of the nonsense people are talking about, you know, just in discrimination and all, I sit there and say, okay, and this is probably politically incorrect, but as a man, I may not have daughters. I may not have a wife, but I had a mother. And pretty high odds that I had a mother. Why would I want any less from my mother, my wife, my daughters than they can achieve?
Well,
Because
not everybody has respect for their mothers, their wives, their daughters.
That's true.
And they
That's
like
truly
to
sad.
control and have power. You just sit by. I know what's best for you, and pat you on the head and patronize you. And that's how I show I love you, because, you know, I mean, in that thinking, they justify a lot. So it's not clear, you know, black or white. Oh, I love you. No, I don't. It's very much trying to control, trying to contain. And some of the other subtle messages, I had that woman that said, you know, for white babies, or, you know, at that rally, and then said she misspoke, Freudian slip. I mean, but that's the ultimate agenda. I mean, that's what they're trying to do. In Charlotte, when they were chanting, Jews will not replace us. What is that? I mean, what do you, so they're afraid of being replaced, and in their twisted mind, they think that this is happening, you know, and they're scared to death about losing their control, their input on how this country is going to look. So they're doing a lot of stuff around that whole issue to kind of corral what they see as a takeover on people.
Now, just because something is not granted by the Constitution, it's not forbidden.
No, it's not. Exactly.
I mean, that's my point, to say, wait a minute, you're saying you're not given the right to drive your car at 65 miles an hour in the Constitution because there were no cars. Well, it doesn't say you can't. And back when they wrote the Constitution, I don't think they were worried about cars speeding up and down the highways. So I guess I just don't get it. And what I wonder is, how do you look at 50 states with dramatically different laws?
And what happens to Puerto Rico that's not a state, or Washington, D.C. that's not a state? How do they navigate through that?
That's a good question.
Well, I think
don't know.
It's interesting to talk about also in the case of the New York State gun law, where the state is supposed to be where all the power is held, according to the Supreme Court, except in the case of guns, where you have to have guns. I don't get it. The Supreme Court said something to the effect that they wanted to return to the historical norm of gun, ownership. But the New York State law was in effect for 100 years. So
they go to
what are you
musket?
talking about? And even then, Scalia regularly said that the initial part of the Second Amendment, the fact that we should have a well-regulated militia, that we should ignore that because that's outdated. Well, that seems awfully convenient for his political decisions. And, just to speak very briefly on the rest of it, it's just so very clear that the states that have gun control are much safer from gun violence than those that are not. And I have the stats here real quick. If I could read the, let's see. The safest states are ones that have gun control, all blue states: Hawaii, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Rhode Island, New York, Connecticut, California, Minnesota, another blue state, New Hampshire, trending blue, has more open gun laws, but nonetheless still relatively safe because it's surrounded by gun control states. And then right after that, there's maybe one or two red states. If you look at the bottom, the ones that are least safe, you're looking at Mississippi, Louisiana, Wyoming, Missouri, Alabama, Alaska, all red states at the very bottom. So
What about Texas?
it can't be more clear that the states that have more permissive gun laws allow you to open carry and all that. It's just less safe. And that's borne out in basically any stat you want to look at. The presence of firearms makes you less safe. It's just as simple as that. And so there's a thought by some people that this is actually a strategy, that the reason they overturned the New York State gun law is actually to make people in blue states feel less safe. I don't know how to feel about that necessarily, but there are scholars who study authoritarianism, and they say that from everything they see, that seems to be a political strategy by Republicans to make people feel safe, less safe.
So they justify the new laws they make.
Yes, be that as it may, and to disrupt society, because disruption of society is good if you really serve the extreme wealth in the country, which is what they do. Mm-hmm. That having the middle and lower classes disrupted by gun violence constantly, trying to force fascistic policy on people, like, I don't know, SWAT teams in the school. That is a substitute for coherent public policy.
Now, wait a minute. I'll admit, I was one of the people who supported $600,000 to put SWAT teams in Milford schools. And I remember looking at Chris Moore and saying, God help us if we vote against this and something happens in our schools. Because they brought up the fact that most SWAT teams can make it to, our regional SWAT team, they could be in Milford within 30 to 42 minutes from being called.
And how many kids can get killed in the interim?
Well, the tragedy was 18 minutes is the average length. Forget Texas, that's an outlier. But
I don't think Texas is the outlier, Al. That's the problem.
Right.
That having armed guards at the school almost never stops anything.
They had an armed guard in Buffalo when they shot him at the supermarket.
They had one at Columbine.
You know,
in Uvalde, the police were in the schools with the shields and everything and letting those kids get shot up. They weren't even doing anything. But I'm not saying that that would be the norm. That's an outlier. But what I am saying is it AK-15? That's the name of the gun, the high-powered rifle that keeps getting
it's
used?
all those type.
Well, how many people get shot in a matter of seconds? It doesn't matter if the SWAT team's in Milford or Boston or Framingham, whatever. You're going to have a whole bunch of dead kids before anybody shows up, as long as guns like that are in the possession of people that shouldn't have them. And, you know, we just had a success in Congress. It's a low bar, but at least we did get some bipartisan support for gun regulation. I mean, stuff that should be obvious, you know, we don't want young, crazy people having guns. Duh. You wouldn't think we'd have to make a law to do, you wouldn't think that would be an argument. And yet.
Well, they talked about when Clinton, when they had the automatic rifle law in the 90s, it was, unfortunately, it was a time limit thing, right? And that expired. But during that time, the data is that there were less murders, less assaults during that time, but people didn't have access to that. And then after that expired, I forgot when it expired, and then there was an increase. So, you know, let's deal with the facts. They don't want to hear the facts. You know, they deal with the emotions, the alt-right, and so that's what they're playing on. And unfortunately, Democrats have an awful time of messaging, and you know, we tend not to. We tend to want to do logical things like information and facts and data.
No, but Christine, what worries me is we passed certain laws. Like I remember when the trigger guard law came out. I went out and bought a trigger guard lock for my shotgun. I haven't touched it in 30 years, but it's in my house. I had it since I was a kid. I wonder how many drug dealers read the law and went out and bought trigger guards for their Glocks that they use to sell drugs. Yeah.
How many of those drug dealers are on killing kids in school and supermarkets? They're taking care of their business. I'm not justifying it, but what I'm saying is that it's the people that, you're right, there are going to be always some people that are not going to follow the law. That happens, sadly. That's the reality. But we can curtail a certain amount in that population. You know, an 18-year-old who can't vote, who's going to buy an automatic weapon so powerful that it can decapitate a kid when they shoot at him. You know, I mean, what do we need those kind of weapons for? My husband has guns. My husband has, you know, a shotgun. He's got another, I don't know much about guns anyway. I don't even like touching them. But I mean, he goes hunting, he goes sports shooting, and he's responsible. It's not about not having guns. It's what kind of guns. He doesn't need an automatic weapon that can shoot 30, 40, 50 rounds in a minute. I mean, even if you go hunting, what kind of hunter would you be?
You're not.
The parents in Uvalde, and I'm sure in all the other places too, they couldn't even identify their children. Right. Those assault rifles are meant to, you know, explode. I mean, you've got DNA evidence. That's all that's left in a lot of these situations. I mean, they're killing children. The pro-life party is so concerned about babies until they're born and go to school, and then shoot them up.
We're spending $600,000 a year on a SWAT team, and we could use that for food for kids in the schools. I mean, this is the fear factor that Glenn was talking about that kind of triggers people like the community of Milford to say, oh my God, what if kids are shot? We would feel horrible. Let's throw some money at it so we do the right thing. And how effective is that really?
But Chris, we give free lunch. Like at the high schools, 50% of the kids.
50%. We could probably feed them all.
Well, okay. How about we take some of that money and spend it on civics education? Because I think if more people actually had a good basic, you know, understanding of civics, we might not be in this bigger picture mess that we're in right now. All I'm saying is that the SWAT team, because I voted against it on town meeting. I thought it was silly then. I think it's silly now. I don't understand the logic of it. I don't have any problem with people being trained in that kind of stuff. But it's when you're dealing with, most of these mass shootings are happening with AK-15s, and so many people can be shot in such a short amount of time. I don't really see what difference it makes. I honestly don't.
And where is that SWAT team? Is it in Milford? Are they sitting there with their guns at the ready for $600,000 every year?
Yes.
And what's that got us? And we were worried about spending $60,000 for a police committee to get a police chief.
No, Chris, they're sitting in the schools. They rotate within the 4 schools. And
How many officers are in each school at any time?
1. There's 3 of them that
and
rotate.
there was one armed guard in Buffalo that was ineffective. And there was the armed guard was out of Texas. Was he not in the building in Texas?
Well, Uvalde is silly because of a million reasons of sitting around for an hour. My God.
I mean, there was that woman that ran. They tried to arrest her, and then they let her go, and then she jumped a fence and ran and saved both of her children, and ran back out. I mean,
right?
What the heck, you know? And then there was this video of like the 2 cops were standing in the hallway just outside. They could hear the shots, and they had a shield. And I mean,
they were waiting. What were they waiting for?
You know, at the end of the day, if I'm there with a gun and I think the animal is killing kids, I got to admit, I'd be in trouble because I'd be running in. I couldn't imagine sitting around waiting for the guy to run out of bullets or run out of kids. It's just horrible.
Mm.
Now, some of the laws I'm absolutely in favor of. You know, when somebody says, I need a gun today, to me, that sends my antenna straight up in the air. If I want to buy a gun and there's a gun show coming up and I have any amount of responsibility associated with me, then I'll plan ahead and I'll go for a check. It's like if the cops ask me, could we search your car for heroin? I'd say, go ahead, because I have none. Could we search it for any drugs? Go ahead. I have nothing to hide. So, you know, this whole idea of not allowing proper time to vet people, I don't understand. If I'm your husband, Christine, and I want a gun to go hunting with. Now, when I was a kid and we went hunting, we went deer hunting, I had 3 shells with me. That 3 or 4, that'd be the most I'd take for a weekend. And I don't think I ever shot 4 times. So the idea of playing Pancho Villa with the strap of bullets doesn't seem logical to me.
The idea, this notion of having to have an automatic weapon, that it's basically a weapon of war. I mean, so that need, that right that they think is, you know, people who believe in having that kind of right, it's so important to them. People are weaponizing the Constitution in a way that is adverse to the greater good. And I don't care if you're talking about the Second Amendment with guns, or if you're talking about the First Amendment with hate speech. It's the same thing. The far right they're bastardizing our Constitution, and now we've got people on the Supreme Court who are political animals. They're not using reasoned logic. They're not relying on precedent. They're just basically throwing 50 years of precedent out the window. And I fear for our future, truly.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, some of the logic of having a semi-automatic weapon, I mean, even the Army realized if you fired AK-47s or M16s, if you put that on full auto, and what we're talking in the US is semi-automatic, so you got to pull the trigger each time. But if you ever tried to empty a clip, a 15-round clip, you'll be shooting up in the air by the time you're done. This Rambo thing of holding a machine gun under his arm and shooting everything is nonsense. It's absolute silliness. You sit there and say the M16s have single shot, 3 shot in auto, because most of the time your 3rd shot's already shooting up in the air. So the idea that somebody needs to empty a 15-round clip is just, I mean, it may be fun to do it in a range. You know, you can't get an automatic weapon. You cannot get a machine gun without a special license. Why? Because nobody needs it.
And now that kid Rittenhouse, I mean, he's like some little darling of the far right now. I mean,
he is a celebrity.
we're really,
He's a sick boy.
And so is the court or the jury that exonerated him too from that. Because you can't tell me that you drove interstate with a weapon and you feared for your life. Seriously, you put yourself in that situation. Self-defense, doesn't that mean as if you have no other options?
Well, that's like the people who say, I shot him in the back for self-defense reasons. Wait a minute, the person was running away from you?
Right.
It's some things just.
Where was the danger? Where was the risk?
If I'm in Massachusetts, I really don't feel danger from somebody in Tennessee. So if I drive to Tennessee, I got a problem with the logic. Now, we've got a few minutes. Let's keep going on Supreme Court. What is with this idea of contraception? Where does that even start to be an issue?
Well, I mean, Griswold versus Connecticut, that's part of the precedent that followed after Roe, and it gives you, it's contraception between
unmarried women. Wasn't it about not being married? That was 73, somebody, because before that, contraception was only for women who were married. And I don't think they allowed it. I mean, even though it may have been not enforced, but there was that women.
But again, let me ask you a question. What does my nose belong in your bedroom?
Thank you.
Well, I think the ruling on the ruling is based on the right to privacy.
It was marital privacy, though, Christine. You're right, but it's been interpreted bigger, which is just the general idea of privacy.
And the concept of privacy is also the underpinning for gay marriage and interracial marriage as well. So all of those things are now.
Clarence Thomas can't be going after interracial marriage.
Well, he didn't mention it in his decision conspicuously because he's in an interracial.
Because if he got home, he'd get stomped on.
Possibly. And so I think it's pretty hypocritical that he didn't mention it, but there you are. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see whether conservatives will try to overturn that aspect of law. They're certainly going to come after gay marriage because they've never been happy with that decision. And the public has more or less moved on from that, but they have held on to this grudge for some time. So I would expect gay marriage to be challenged very, very shortly.
But again, I remember when I was at a company and a young lady came in and said, do you offer as a company significant other benefits? And I looked at her, I said, no. And I don't think I'll ever support that. And she said, I'm surprised. Why? I said, if you want the benefits of people who are married, then go get married. And she said, well, do you support women being married? I said, I don't care what married is. That's not my business. My only issue is if I graduated college and somebody said, do you want free health care? Say you're my gay partner. I'm gay. I'll take free health care. And you couldn't deal with it. So to me, it was simple. I could support benefits for married couples. It's up to you to decide who you're going to marry. None of my dang business. So going after same-sex marriages, I thought we were over that.
We are. Very much so.
It's just that group of people that doesn't like it, and they're going to do whatever they can to kind of make everybody look like they do.
And this
I don't like broccoli, but I got to deal with it. You know, come on, there's a lot of things I don't like, and they're trivial. Not liking the way you want to run your life?
Well, then maybe we should nominate you for the Supreme Court.
No.
You might be more qualified than some of the clowns that are on there now. I mean, it's just.
I guess my question is, how does this affect them? My confusion is that why is it such an issue for them when at the end of the day, it does not even affect them. So if somebody wants to have a gay marriage, okay, it doesn't affect me. It doesn't hurt me. It doesn't help me. It doesn't do anything. It's what they want to do.
They think it's giving. You're
Christine,
complicit. It's making government complicit in abnormal behavior, right?
Well,
they
look at
it
the
like,
books.
I mean, they're looking at everything through the prism of a far right mentality.
Very
They're looking at everything,
narrow.
it's like, I was raised Catholic and I rejected it at a very young age. In fact, I was kicked out of CCD class, long story, but because I questioned everything even back then. That's me. But my grandmother was very devout and I respected that. But I would never expect anybody who is devout to tell me how to live my life. It's just, and I would never tell anybody to think the way I think. You do you, And it seems so obvious to me. I don't understand why it's not obvious to other people. And the thing that's so crazy to me, if white people are so worried about losing power, then, if they're making these pronouncements about religion, what happens if Christianity is no longer the dominant religion? Are you going to be comfortable with, like Christine said, being out on the 50-yard line, howling at the moon or something? Like, I mean, what? It's stupid.
Well, there is a very concrete thing Republicans could do if they want to take power in a democracy, and that's come up with better ideas. But that's something that they will not do. They cannot do because their donors do not want any other ideas other than the ones they're presenting. And so Republicans will obscure and obfuscate about what they're really doing. They'll have lots of criticism of President Obama and Democrats, and they can talk at length about how bad they are. But if you ask them, okay, what are you going to do about it? They got nothing to say.
But aren't they saying the same thing about the Democrats? Aren't the Republicans saying the same thing about the Democrats?
Well, we talk about policy all the time, and that's the difference between us. And
we have a written platform. The Republican Party doesn't.
Yeah, they actually wrote a platform. Senator Scott published one fairly recently, and one of the things he put in the plan was that all laws would expire after 5 years. And in order for them to continue, they'd have to be renewed. So imagine that Medicare and Social Security and Medicaid and all these things that working class fought for decades ago will all be repealed only because after 5 years, time's up, have to renew them. And in a divided Congress like this, I think the chance of them being renewed is virtually zero. So that's the Republican plan right there.
How do you answer that right now? What we've done the last 2 years has hurt the lower class, the lower income people, a lot worse than anybody else. $5 a gallon gas, inflation at 8%. If you're making 500, 700,000 a year, you can survive that. If you're making 30, 40 grand a year,
well,
what's the awful strain?
So the inflation is a worldwide problem. It's not a U.S. problem. And what Biden has done is actually better than what other, modern economies have done in Europe in particular. The inflation problem is much better here than it is there. Let's put it that way. And actually, Democrats had a lot of policies that would have been very good for people at the very bottom of the income spectrum. They wanted to continue the child tax credit, which basically took 50% of kids who are in poverty now out of poverty. And I know I'm blanking on some of the other policies, but there were a whole raft of policies that would have helped people in the middle and the lower classes. And unfortunately, it stopped up in the Senate. There are two Democrats in particular who won't side with it, won't break the filibuster to renew those policies. So assuming we get more senators, which I guess is possible in the next election, those things can finally pass.
But do you feel you're better off now than you were 2 years ago?
Yeah.
I do, yeah. In comparison to where we were with Trump, where COVID was completely out of control, and it didn't appear really had a plan. He had a plan to generate the vaccine, but I don't have confidence that he would have put together a plan to distribute it fairly or properly. He certainly would have rewarded his cronies first and foremost. And there was really no distribution plan at all when President Biden came, into the White House. So he had to recreate it on the fly.
And it's Trump's fault. It's Trump's fault that the gas prices are higher because the pandemic. I mean, really.
Oh, seriously, Lauren.
Yes, because the pandemic.
That's a promise I think Biden kept. He said he was going to wage war on fossil fuel, and he has.
Has he? What did he do?
He just went to Saudi Arabia. What are you talking? What I'm saying is supply and demand. Because of the pandemic, less fuel and oil and stuff was being used. People were not going to work. People were not traveling. So there was less need for oil, right? So then the makers of oil were cutting back. And then Russia invades Ukraine, and they were like, what, the second largest exporter of oil in the world. So there's a whole bunch of factors. You can't simplify it and just be like, that's Biden's fault, because and this happens so frequently. We'll get a Democratic president that's trying to fix the messes of the previous administration, and then they get blamed for it. You know what I mean? Like, look at Iraq, for example. I mean, we are still dealing with the effects of a worldwide pandemic, and in dealing with the effects that authoritative governments are having, mostly with respect to us, Russia, the way that they've infiltrated the president, who's infiltrated the Supreme Court. We spent an entire hour talking about the fact that our president initiated a coup of a bunch of nut jobs who he based on a lie to attack the Capitol, and he was fine with the notion of hanging his vice president. I mean, am I the only one that's watching the hearings? It's horrifying.
The fact that he actually physically assaulted somebody in the car because they weren't going to bring him up to the Capitol to march with the people that he knew had weapons, that he incited the whole thing, and he physically assaulted in the motorcade because he wanted to continue that whole thing is amazing.
But didn't he get what he deserved?
What's that?
Didn't he get
Trump?
Yeah.
Not yet.
Not yet.
He won't get what he deserves until he goes to jail. Because what he has done to this democracy is I don't even know if it can be fixed. And I mean the just the last hearing when he was they had texts in which he was trying to tamper with witnesses, saying, we know you'll do the right thing, that kind of stuff. It's like mob boss stuff. I mean, he incited a group. He knew that several of those people had, speaking of AK-15s and other kinds of weapons and body armor, etc. He knew that, but he was more concerned about having a large crowd so that it would look big on film than he was about the safety of the people in the crowd. And his attitude was, well, they're not here to hurt me, so who cares? And then he encouraged those people to go to the Capitol and got them all riled up, like that, this is a fraudulent thing and they're stealing votes, blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, in the background, his personal lawyer had gone all around the country trying to round up an alternative slate of electors to try to literally prevent the peaceful transfer of power based on a legitimate election. That is the biggest problem that's happening right now in this country. I mean, the Supreme Court, it's almost like a red herring, because what's happening in the Supreme Court is one result of a criminal in the presidential office.
We'll take that up at the next show, but let me ask you one last question. What's going to happen in November?
Hopefully people will get out and vote. When more people vote, it represents the real attitude and feelings of the country, and they tend to vote more Democrat. And if people don't like what's happening, they've got to get out there, because it is a minority that's angry, that's terrorists in a way in their thinking, and they're the ones that rattle the cage.
If it's a minority, then they'll keep the House and Senate blue. If it's not a minority, then it's going to be an interesting next 2 years.
Well, I think it's driven a lot by gerrymandering in a lot of states, like Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and some of the other key states where
Massachusetts.
Well, Massachusetts is, I mean, if you compare the Massachusetts district maps to what's going on in places,
well, they're a lot better.
What's that?
They're a lot better, Glenn. But remember, we came from Richie Neal, who had Milford to almost Springfield as a banana, to make sure that the Republicans, all 12 of them, got blended out.
Well, I get that, and you know, I think we might have one Republican representative if we change the maps a bit here in Massachusetts. But if you look at some of the other states, you know, the Democrats in Wisconsin regularly win statewide office and win with healthy margins, but in the state level, they're behind by I believe it was like 65 to 35 in the House, something like that.
Guys,
So-
I hate to say it, but we've hit the time limit.
No,
We'll continue with all the other decisions. We'll have to not wait 6-8 weeks for the next show. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Al.
thank you for having us. And
To all of our viewers, to our 6 loyal viewers, may God bless. May tomorrow be a better night than tonight. Thanks for listening.
Not too long since I've been home. Been running all my life just